Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, wherever you are. I hope it's not insufferably warm as it is in the UK at the moment. But a welcome. I just want to endorse that welcome that's just been given to you by Mary Beth. I'm Richard Outram, as has been said. I'm one of the co-founders of the Transatlantic Nuclear Free Alliance. I'm also active with an organisation called the Welsh Anti-Nuclear Alliance. I should just say, with the Transatlantic Nuclear Free Alliance, we're basically a coalition of US, UK, Canadian, and European anti-nuclear activists that are coming together to collaborate in partnership on issues around the nuclear industry that concern us all. And this is one of a number of online events that we've arranged for this year. So I'm very delighted to welcome you, and particularly to welcome and introduce Linda Pentz Gunter to join us today for this important discussion about this amazing new book. So, just to introduce Linda a little bit first, for anyone who doesn't already know Linda, Linda Pentz Gunter is the founder of the US-based non-profit Beyond Nuclear and serves as its executive director. She also launched and writes for her organisation's news platform, Beyond Nuclear International. A former journalist with Reuters, she currently writes for the Morning Star in the UK and Ralph Nader's Capitol Hill Citizen. And you'll be aware that Linda's the author of a new and important book, No to Nuclear. But to give it its full title, it is Why Nuclear Power Destroys Lives, Derails Climate Progress, excuse me, and Provokes War, which is published by Pluto Press as an ebook and also as a paperback. And I'm sure we'll have a link in the chat about the link to the publisher. I wanted to start by just reading the description of the book. So there is no silver bullet for the climate crisis, but that hasn't stopped people searching. Seizing its chance, the nuclear power industry wants us to believe that theirs is the only technical fix for our deliverance. The public, politicians, and the media have been easily swayed. This should come as no surprise. After all, the pro-nuclear PR campaign is richly funded and has an army of lobbyists sowing myths while the industry reaps the rewards of taxpayer-funded subsidies. No to Nuclear calls the industry's bluff, blasting aside, great phrase that, its claim to be safe and green. Linda Pentz Gunter makes the irresistible case that nuclear power is too slow, too expensive, too dangerous, and too integrally connected to the nuclear weapons complex to serve as a rational energy choice. The book also delves into the lives of Indigenous peoples and communities of colour who have been harmed the most by the nuclear sector and questions whether the way we devalue nature and the environment is costing us the chance of a genuinely just energy transition. So, having said that, I just wanted to spend just a moment outlining the format of the event. So, I've got a few introductory questions for Linda, and then the intention is that I'll be joined by my colleagues from the Transatlantic Nuclear Free Alliance, Mary Beth, Morgan, Lisa, for a discussion of some of the issues raised by the book. And then we'll take questions from you, the audience. And lastly, I'm going to invite Linda to make some final comments and to remind us how we can buy the book. So as has been said, we are going to record the event and it will be available on our new YouTube account in due course. So, Linda, could I first ask you to tell us what the reader will discover in your book?
Thank you, Richard, and thanks for the introduction and for all of you folks joining us today. And yeah, I rather like blasted aside as well. I didn't write the blurb on the book, just so you know, but it was a good one from the publisher. I was pleased with that. So yeah, I mean, what's in the book are human faces and stories of their lives, heroic people, Indigenous people, heroes, villains, victims, triumphs. And that was really the intention behind it, was to tell stories and put the human, not just the human, but also the animal face on the story. So that's what's in the book, along with a few surprising things, humor, I would say. I wanted it to be an easy read, accessible to everybody, to bring the subject more alive. And so you will find some unusual things in there. There are human beings, but there are also sea turtles. There are also bitterns and peregrines and space issues about space and night sky pollution. And it goes a lot of places, but all of it speaks to the sort of central thesis of the book, which is really about stewardship of the planet and what we need to do to achieve that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So what motivated you to write the book then?
Well, actually, I can point the finger of blame firmly at M.V. Ramana, who many of you probably know, who also wrote a brilliant book called Nuclear is Not the Solution, and who suggested to me that I should write a book. And my initial response was, well, why? Who would read it? It is such an arcane subject, and it's not going to be on the number one on the New York Times bestseller list. And so what was really the point? And he said, we just need more books out there on this subject, which is true, because we are completely confronted, and this really speaks to the motivation. We are completely confronted with a tsunami of propaganda, which we can't, even with our books, hope to counteract, because we just don't have the funds, the resources to mount that kind of saturation campaign. But nevertheless, we have to answer it. We have to push back. We have to set the record straight, deliver the truth about this. So that was one of the reasons. And the other was really to tell the story in a different way. That I've done a few of these talks now, and I don't use PowerPoint. I don't have graphs or charts in the book. That was deliberate. It was to turn it into storytelling, put the human face on the story, try to bring it home to people, appeal to their core values and what they understand about the world, and not try to, so that they would perhaps get over this idea that, I won't understand this. It's going to be too technical, too scientific, too economic. I'm not qualified, that sort of feeling that some of us still have. And so that was really what motivated me to put. I thought also we needed somewhere that had kind of the whole indictment in one place. A lot of books specialize on certain things about nuclear, but the idea behind this was to say, okay, if you're sort of in a bit of a quandary, not sure where things stand in terms of climate mitigation, and I expect this is not the audience I'm speaking to now, but it is the audience I want to reach. So if you're thinking about that and you read this book, by the time you get to the end, you should be utterly convinced that there's no way that this is an acceptable technology, neither the nuclear power side of it, nor its evil twin, the nuclear weapons side.
Okay, thank you. So what core messages should we take from the book then?
I think for me, the core message was really about compassion, about caring for each other, about caring for our fellow human beings, about caring for the animals that we share this planet with, stewardship for nature. Because if we can't find that love and compassion, and we're clearly not finding it now, we seem to be in an era where the very opposite is happening. We have to find that compassion and caring, because that's the path to justice. And that's the essential component. Like, when you go to the rallies, you hear people chant, no justice, no peace. I feel like in this instance, no justice, no abolition of nuclear power, nuclear weapons. It's centered in justice. And so we've got to put that first. And so that's the core message of the book. Compassion first, that's the path to justice. Justice is the path to nuclear abolition. And so we can't look at it in isolation. It's not a thing by itself. It's connected to everything else we do, to wars, to racism, colonialism, all those issues that affect how we survive on planet Earth. And it's connected to climate. And that's really the core thesis of the book, that question about why is it that we're doing all these destructive things that clearly are sending us on an inevitable march to our own demise. nuclear being one of them, burning fossil fuels, continuing to burn them being another. So that really is that's the core message, I feel.
Right, thank you. One of the things I was pleased to see is that you've highlighted particularly the disproportionate impact of nuclear operations on Indigenous people and communities of colour and women and young girls, which are groups that traditionally either marginalised or ignored by the nuclear industry. Can you give us any examples from the book specifically about this disproportionate impact upon these communities? You said about human stories. Are there any particular human stories you could highlight for us here?
I mean, there are so many because they kind of thread their way through the book. I think what's emblematic, though, of that issue is that at least here I'm not sure how it works in the UK, but over here in the US, the standard by which we decide how much exposure to radiation is allowed is based on something called reference man, who
Yeah,
is a
same here.
25 to 35-year-old white male, healthy white male, the
Yeah,
person who can withstand the most radiation. Not that there's any safe dose, let's be clear about that. But we're not protecting for the most vulnerable. And it's clear from the medical evidence that women, especially pregnancy, babies, small children, females versus males, are more susceptible to harm, and we're not protecting for that. In the book, what I look at, and it's a story that repeats itself in every phase of this industry, is the disproportionate harm, the preying upon Indigenous communities for uranium mining and for the milling piece of this. Even when you look at the nuclear power plants, there's a chapter in there about the Grand Gulf nuclear power plant in Mississippi, in the poorest county, in the poorest state in the country, predominantly 83% Black, where they've got none of the so-called tax benefits and all of the risks. So you've got that. And then you get into the whole waste story. You go onto Indigenous Aboriginal lands in Australia, Western Shoshone lands in the United States, Scotia Indian Reservation, on and on. The deliberate targeting of communities likely to be the least resourced to fight back tend to be communities of color. We have a similar thing here in the US with the fossil fuel industry in Cancer Alley down in Texas and Louisiana. So you've got it with the hog farms in North Carolina and predominantly Black communities. So it's a passion that repeats itself over and over through multiple industries, but it's certainly true of ours. And then I did look in the book also at the nuclear weapons connection and also just at nuclear weapons. And so then when you look at the atomic testing, where that went on, and we hear, well, we only use the nuclear weapons twice, yes, in war, but always on brown people, right? So we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We tested in Nevada, Western Shoshone, unceded Western Shoshone land. The US did most of their testing either in Nevada or in the Marshall Islands, the French in French Polynesia, the British in Australia on Aboriginal land, and so on. And so when you hear the stories of the birth defects and the health consequences, the lack of reparation, the lack of compensation, the lack of an apology even, something that basic, it's a story that keeps repeating throughout everything that I sort of researched for the book.
Yeah, great. That's a really comprehensive response. Thank you. Um, just a last one from me, and then we can kind of throw it open to colleagues from the TNFLA for comments. I know Mary Beth, you had a specific question you wanted to ask. Linda, you've spoken of your hope that the purchasers of this book will buy a copy for family members, friends, especially those who maybe are inclined to accept the arguments that we need nuclear power as part of the energy mix. Can you explain why it's important that we spread this message more widely and how buying this book will help to do that?
Yeah. When I first founded Beyond Nuclear in 2007, we had a lovely board member named Lou Friedman, and who's passed away now. But one of the pieces of advice he told me, he says, remember, when it comes to nuclear power, no one knows anything at all, which was supposed to be encouraging, I guess. But it was sort of a reminder that don't assume that this is something that people understand, have been taught about. That in 2007 was probably true. Today, people think they know something about nuclear power, but it's the propaganda that they've been fed as a constant drumbeat the last 10, 15 years. And so when I go out and talk about things, I get people saying to me things parroting that propaganda as if they were fact. Well, of course, but nuclear power is clean and reliable and safe and green and renewable and all these sound bites. Cheap. It's going to be cheaper. The new ones are going to be cheaper. They're meltdown proof. They consume their own waste. There's an endless list of things that now are considered knowledge. So now people do know about nuclear power, but what they know is all complete pack of lies. And so it's really an attempt to say, those of you on this call probably are here because you're already interested in the subject. You already know quite a bit about it. So I don't need to convince anybody here, I assume. But you all know people who either are giving you that pack of propaganda or are sort of not sure, but shouldn't we use it because it's here now anyway, and it's zero carbon or low carbon, and we need all of the above, all the things we hear all the time. So this book is really intended to try to sort of set that record straight. I want to just sort of loop back, actually, because I don't know if we're going to have a chance to do this during the conversation, but when we were talking about the disproportionate impact on Indigenous people, I wanted to just read a short excerpt from the book, partly to communicate that story and partly to give you a sense of the book, because one of the things I really try to emphasize to people is that this book is supposed to be an easy read, very clear, down to earth, fun. People have said to me in slightly apologetically, well, I kind of enjoyed your book. That seems like the wrong word to use for this subject, but I enjoyed it. And there are jokes in there, so it's sort of, it's supposed to not be a slog. I remember somebody, I can't remember who it was. I think it was the guy that wrote the incredible sort of long biographies. I think it was of Johnson, President Johnson. He said, the worst thing a writer can be told is your book was good, but it was a bit of a trudge. So the thing you don't want is for it to be a bit of a trudge. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read a little snippet and maybe one other later in the program to give you a sense of this hopefully not being a trudge. And so this is going back to the repetition of targeting Indigenous lands, and it's specifically about Yucca Mountain, which, for anyone who isn't familiar, was and still is the only site in the United States identified as a deep geological repository for high-level radioactive waste from commercial nuclear power plants, and is a big hole in the ground at the moment, and was canceled under the Obama administration, but could potentially be revived depending on how the political journey we're on goes. So this is in the context, it's called Serpent Swimming Westward, this section. I won't read the whole chapter, I'll just read you a little snippet. So, absent a permanent, safe solution for the storage of radioactive waste, where does it go in the meantime? We must return to the lands of Indigenous peoples and communities of color. Yucca Mountain ripples across western Shoshone land in Nevada. We are back in the dream time with stories of serpents. The Shoshone call Yucca Mountain Serpent Swimming Westward. It is a sacred place. It was also never ceded to the US government. But for a time, it was the chosen destination for America's high-level radioactive waste repository, breaking the Treaty of Ruby Valley. The protests by Western Shoshone and the political might of the state of Nevada eventually held sway, forcing the cancellation of funding for the repository plan, but not permanently eliminating Yucca Mountain as a candidate site. The US Department of Energy had always insisted it was the ideal location with a low population density where minimal harm would be done to people and the environment. In the view of the DOE, Yucca Mountain was a place where there was nothing to harm. But the eyes of the government officials do not observe in the same way as those of the Western Shoshone. They see the quaking aspens, a tree species that dates back 80,000 years. They defend the Tim's buckwheat, an endangered plant found on their land within just a 5-kilometer range and nowhere else on Earth, but whose survival is in jeopardy from a proposed lithium mine there. They observe the slow desert tortoise, the official state reptile, a threatened species, but threatening no one. And they share their ancestral homeland with the devil's hole pupfish, a critically endangered species that is thought to be as much as 60,000 years old, dwelling in a single watery Nevada cavern. On this land, native people are trying hard to preserve a precious corner of their history. For now, the Yucca Mountain Repository remains a ghostly abandoned tunnel leading nowhere, although there are renewed efforts to revive it. And the thing that struck me also in looking at this was how the stewardship of land by Indigenous peoples, when they talk about their land, they don't mean they own it. They mean they're stewarding it, they're caring for it. It's not their property, right? So we don't own land. And that's the difference between the way our white capitalist cultures behave in terms of going in and seizing land and mining it for whatever they need, taking it away, getting all the profits, leaving the Indigenous folks behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Thank you, Linda. That was great. Um, I wanted to bring in Mary Beth, and I actually wanted to ask Morgan something as well afterwards, if I may. Mary Beth, do you want to come in? You had a question as well. Do people want to introduce themselves if they haven't already?
Looks like we have a lot of Canadian folks on the call. That's wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm hoping that people will put their questions in the chat for Linda. My question is based on a statement in the book that I found very provocative because I too have pondered about this and would like Linda's response. I'll quote her. What underpins our compunction to continue such a reckless plunder of our planet that inevitably will lead to our collective demise? Blindness to nuclear dangers is part of a larger malaise. What can you say more about that, Linda? Thank you.
It sounds very lofty, doesn't it? I wish I had the answer. But speaking of lofty, I mean, one of my, pet theories, I guess, is, and it's in the book a little bit, is about light pollution. And this sounds like it's going to be totally off topic, but it sort of speaks to why we barrel right ahead doing stupid things like nuclear power and nuclear weapons. The light pollution issue is so profound. I think it's in the book, but I think the statistics, over 90% of us in the sort of Western hemisphere never see the night sky. We see something, but we don't see what's really there. And so when you do, it's actually kind of a shock, almost overwhelming. When you see, if you go to a place, a dark skies place, what they call, where there's truly none, you can't see 2 feet in front of your feet. I've done this once in Maine. It was actually almost frightening. You couldn't, walking was frightening. And so we've lost. So the question I wonder is, if we don't have the sense of where we are and who we are, how are we going to understand how important planet Earth is, how probably unique it is? And even if it isn't, it's the only one we know about that is of this form, with life forms like this. And the extraordinariness, you just have to look at the color of fish or birds or insects and think, gosh, how on earth did this happen? No matter how you believe it happened, it's amazing to see. And if we can't sense that we're this tiny blue marble in this amazing universe full of these stars and planets, do we lose, sense of our own value and our own importance and continuing life on Earth? And I do think, although I'm guilty of it like anybody else, we spend far too much time looking down at our iPhones and not up into the sky, partly because we can't see it, but we also don't seek it out. And so we have to sort of recapture so many things about being at one with the earth we live on. I'm just going to start repeating myself now in terms of the compassion theory, but I do feel like that, that's part of the answer, maybe, is that we're just so focused. We've forgotten that, there's so much else out there, even just beyond our perimeter fence. I remember when COVID hit and people started thinking, oh gosh, there's so many birds, the birds must be flourishing again. But it was just that we could hear them in the silence of lockdown. That was what was different. We're actually losing birds tremendously. So I think there's that piece of it that really, that's why I quote in the book some nature writing as well. There's a section in there I love. It's like my favorite chapter is really the Lorax and the peregrine, even though it almost has nothing to do with nuclear power. But the nature writing is so powerful, and it reminds you of how beautiful it is. And of course, we also have the astronauts with the overlook effect when they saw the Earth from space and how moved they were and how heartbroken they were to realize what we were doing to each other down there when we ought to be all in it together right now, right? To save what we have. But how are we going to, and then the other piece, of course, is the AI story, is that really we've almost got to the point where we think we can be an autonomous species and that we can live here without anything else. And we don't need the web of life because we can just use AI to keep everything going. So these are all rather depressing things to end on. But at the same time, I think the other thing that's in the book and that we're seeing now repeatedly is the resilience of small groups of people willing to say no and make change. And that's what does make change in the end, as the famous Margaret Mead quote goes as well. And we've seen that over and over again. We're still seeing that. And so it's worth it, even if you feel defeated, it's worth doing something because the prize is so huge. It's the planet, right? And so important. So it's absolutely essential not just to go to bed and think, oh, well, I'm just going to live a hedonist lifestyle now until I die because there's nothing we can do. No, there is something we can do, and people are doing it. And it's encouraging to see.
Oh, thank you, Linda. That's beautiful. I think it's so important for our own health, our psychological health, our spiritual health, not to mention our physical health, to use the anxiety and that energy that is of frightening knowledge of what's going on in our world today in positive action. Yeah.
And Mary Beth, I mean, that's what is so brilliant about your film as well, that you, in a way, I feel like there's some sort of synergy between your film and my book, because what you're doing in that film is telling the whole story, but of the nuclear picture. I mean, it's all there. If you want a tutorial on the entire, everything that's wrong with nuclear power, you watch San Onofre syndrome. But it's told through the lens of a very local, small group of people going, hang on a second, this can't be, citizen science, really, right?
Right.
And citizen investigative journalists. I mean, none of them are scientists or investigative journalists, but that's what they did. And so that encapsulates, your film encapsulates exactly what I'm trying to do with this book, which is to say, these are the hero stories, and they aren't politicians or world leaders or billionaire tech bros. They're us. And we're all capable of this, and we can all do it, because if they can do it, we can all do it.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Well, I have a couple of questions from the chat that I'll ask you, but Morgan, do you want to have a moment to make a comment or ask a question? I'm so grateful for Morgan. Your audio, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. I did want to ask a question. When reading your book, I loved getting all these stories. As someone who loves stories and hearing people where they're coming from and what has happened and their point of views. And I didn't know about church rock. And I was so struck of what a huge disaster this was, and that I had, never heard of it. And it just, I wonder why you think that this event was overlooked so deeply, and what does that look like now we're generations in for the community around church rock?
Well, for those who don't know what church rock was, on July 16th, 1979, so just a few months after the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant disaster, there was a tailings dam break at the Church Rock uranium mine and mill. It burst. It was known to be fragile, but nothing was done. And it burst, and I think it was 93 million gallons of liquid radioactive waste and tons of solid radioactive waste burst out through this broken dam wall into the Puerco River and contaminated the Puerco River. It's the biggest accidental radioactive release in American history. And as you said, Morgan, you and many others had never heard about it. And I think the answer is self-evident because the population to whom this happened was mostly Navajo. So I don't even really need to say anything else as to why no one knows about it. You know, it's just, it was forgotten people far away with no power and no voice who have been fighting ever since then for some sort of adequate cleanup and to be made whole. And they've suffered all the health consequences, they've suffered the deprivations, they've suffered their children being exposed, their grandchildren over down generations, and it's just not talked about. So, but I think it's another environmental racism story, of which there are rather a lot in this book, because that's how the nuclear industry operates. You know, it's the same with the abandoned uranium mines on Navajo and other parts of the American Southwest, that they mined them and they walked away, and the cleanup is minimal. And some of you are familiar with the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which was put into place to try to start compensating people who had suffered exposure from uranium mining and atomic testing and so forth. But it's been a slog it's quite difficult to get the compensation. So you really have to be persistent. Initially, when it was done, none of it was in Navajo. So, you know, for the elders, it wasn't in English. I mean, it was in English, it wasn't in their native languages and so forth. So there's a consistent effort to disenfranchise and ignore certain populations, and that's one of them. And it's amazing. I mean, that story, every time I write it, people are going, oh, I've never heard that. It's in this country. It's the worst nuclear accident other than 3 Mile Island in this country's history, and nobody knows about it.
Well, I'd also like Santa Susana, actually. Nobody knows about that, and that was pretty horrible. I mean, they vented for 12 days during a meltdown over that area of LA. I mean, that's pretty bad. But the Church Rock is just heartbreaking, just heartbreaking. Okay, well, thank you for that response, and thanks for the question, Morgan. I have three interesting questions from the chat. So, Richard, do you want to say anything else, or shall I ask these questions from the chat?
I just wanted to just pick up on one of the points that Linda mentioned earlier. You talked about the tsunami of propaganda from the nuclear industry, and I really wanted to just bring Morgan in on this as well, which is a lot of that tsunami of propaganda is targeted at children and young people. Certainly in the UK, we get an awful lot of it targeted at young people through schools, where the nuclear industry go into schools to propagandize, usually through the guise that they're promoting STEM education. But also, there's a big push on, there's great jobs in the nuclear industry. We've got apprenticeships, we've got traineeships. They also have set up a number of nuclear industry, young people, young entrants groups that they themselves actively propagandize on behalf of the nuclear industry. In fact, some of them have been at climate change conferences. I saw some sickening video footage at a nuclear industry conference where young people were doing some kind of improvised dance to say how important nuclear power was to the future of a zero carbon planet. But I know we've had a conversation, Morgan and colleagues, about particularly how we can promote counter messages to that with the truth about nuclear power and how it isn't necessary to have nuclear power as part of a zero carbon future. And I just wondered, Morgan, if you could tell us a bit about what your thoughts were about how we could perhaps counter that messaging through our own work and the work that you're doing. And maybe Linda might want to comment as well.
Well, I think for us, with Mary Beth and I and Lisa at Eon, we are definitely actively thinking about countering the propaganda. Yes. And so what we're focused on right now, what my training, which is in fine arts, so they didn't try to get me. They were like, she's out. They I know that in general, the propaganda, it's not even, people don't have, my peers don't seem to have a sense that there is even something that they are being propagandized on. They don't have strong opinions on nuclear. They're focused on other things, and you mentioned, they're like, oh, we're still talking about that. It's like that, and I don't mean it to sound. And so, for me, as someone who has a filmmaking background, my intuitive response is to tell people stories, which is Linda's goal here with her book. And I think that we need to like even get more micro and tell really what this means on the ground in really personal, intimate ways for people that have been affected by this now going on generations. And I don't know if that's the best answer for you. I know we at Eon are working on a structure to be able to tell these stories in small social media shareable bites that can be shared and spread around by this incredible network that does exist, which is this movement full of these incredible and just, I mean, truly this movement is just one amazing human after another. And so I think if we can start getting comfortable about working from the emotional place of the impacts of this technology and what it means at an individual level and for the communities, and get their stories out in front of people, and also connecting people. I know I lived in Los Angeles for 13 years. Mary Beth mentioned Santa Susana, and people who live in Simi Valley have no idea that they're living in a fallout zone. And they are so sick and they have so many illnesses, and no one has ever connected that they might have, or I mean, many people have, but there are still so many people that have not connected that. And in fact, Santa Susana is a great place that they are countering this malaise with their own personal stories. And they have a number of social media campaigns in Simi Valley that have been talking about how this has affected them personally. And they're getting those out. And Santa Susana, just in the time that I have been aware of it, is slowly tipping to the point where people are becoming aware of it on a larger scale. And I think, I don't know, I just want to get that awareness out. I'm continuing to talk, and I don't know if I'm answering your question at all. So I'm going to wrap it up, but I hope that helped answer something.
Thanks, that's great. I don't know, Linda, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think, since we're talking about other ways of telling the story, I mean, one of the things that interested me looking at this, and I think it speaks somewhat to young people, but to all of us. I mean, there's two. I guess I'll back up a minute. So with young people, I think there's other aspects to this that when we do these vertical videos, which I've just started doing, I think there are lots of great people in the movement. Most of us are kind of getting up there, though, no disrespect to our seniority or our seniorness or whatever. But I do think with young people, they need some people that look like them to be telling them these stories, right? And that we don't have that. And we need people who look like them from the communities they come from, not just other white people telling them what they ought to think. So that's key. And I think what I've learned, at least, is that you need to give them something to do, and it needs to be fun. And it can be fun. I mean, the other side of this coin, Richard, is the dancing bananas that you were talking about. They came to the COP at Glasgow. They dressed up in banana costumes, these young people, and they did their banana dance to tell you that it was much more dangerous to eat bananas than live near a nuclear power plant, which of course is, the biggest load of baloney. But it's an oversimplification and a complete misconstruing of what the potassium in bananas actually do to you. So there's that. But I think going back to the other question about media, is that, we talked about your film and how powerful film can be in telling the story. And there are lots of really great documentaries, and there are also lots of really good dramas too. And I think that we've been really struck by, like, for example, the television series Chernobyl was the most watched television drama on HBO Sky History at the time it was aired. Now, why on earth did people flock to see this, to understand what a positive void coefficient is? I mean, this is what got explained in the final episode of Chernobyl, right, by Richard Harris's son. And it worked. People were absolutely riveted to this. So they were able to do a drama about Chernobyl and weave in what a positive void coefficient is, all the technical things that went wrong. So you've got that. I remember when the Uranium Film Festival first started, and I know Norbert, and he said, we're going to start this Uranium Film Festival. I thought, oh, well, that'll last about a year or two, because, I mean, how many films can there be about this subject? Hardly any, and it's still going. It's packed full of films. I went to one of the early ones, and I saw this really weird drama about kind of a love story in a closed nuclear city in one of the, I don't know where it was, in the former Soviet, very strange, but it was the creativity that was poured into telling these stories was amazing. We have Mary Lou Dore with us, a fabulous painter. I mean, I just stumbled upon Mary Lou completely by accident, her marvelous art. And I remember one of the things that struck me, which for me was worth 1,000 words, was a painting you did, Mary Lou, of a dead bird inside one of the waste trash bags after Fukushima, the bags that, the sort of emblematic black bags we see now, and this bird isolated inside it. And that to me, spoke so much about the tragedy of that disaster in one painting. So I encourage you to check out her work. There are all sorts of poetry, novels. There's a section in my book about Congo and this extraordinary shenanigans that went on in the high seas with Mossad stealing uranium from Congo to feed its nuclear weapons program. Ken Follett turned that into a novel called Triple. It's absolutely riveting. It's not exactly the story, but it's based on that. And so, if you want to understand that, Libby Halevi, I don't know if she's on this call, she has her nuclear hot seat. She wrote a musical called, I think it's a musical, it's a play, right? Atomic Bill and the Payment Due, right? So there's another way of learning all the corruption and this is a guy from the New York Times who was implanted inside the Manhattan Project, he was a journalist, but he was there as a propagandist. So you've got so many of these examples in the book as well. I'm sorry to go on so long, but in the book, there's also this segment about Orkney, which was one of the great stories of a little uprising of a small community on a Scottish archipelago where there was uranium, and they stopped uranium mining there, but it was led by Peter Maxwell Davis, a very famous gay, avant-garde, anti-war, modern classical composer who was not from there, but moved there and was part of this movement. And so he wrote something called the Yellow Cake Review. Jolly Waltz Tempo is the musical direction at the beginning of Yellow Cake Review. But it's about the dangers of unleashing uranium in a small community like that. So I think there's lots of ways we can do this. And it doesn't all have to be, we need the academic papers, we need the science, we need the empirical data, but we've got to find a way to translate it into some other form that will reach people and speak to them. And all of those things, I think, that I just listed are all ways that are very effective for different audiences. And that's how we get to young people, but also climate activists, people that just care about the environment. There are so many demographics that we could reach depending on how we tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, time to take some questions from the audience. How are we going to
Well,
do this?
do you want to, I have a list of them. Do you want to go ahead with that, Richard?
Yeah, where's the list?
Well, one of them was asking for, and this is in order that they came in the
Yeah.
chat. Um, when you compare the immense cost of nuclear power versus that of renewables, how can it be that the people aren't paying attention to that very basic disparity?
That's a good question. I mean, it depends who the people are in the question. But if we're talking about our political leaders, which I assume we might be, in this country, we've got a sort of virus that's spreading amongst our state governors who all want suddenly to have new nuclear reactors in their state. And as the questioner says, what could possibly motivate them when, this is not going to, first of all, it's not going to happen anytime soon. So it won't address any of the problems they say they could solve, even if they could solve them. And that's one of the central theses of Amory Lovins's work, actually, which is, you've got to reduce the most carbon the fastest for the least cost, right? So we've got time and cost are the two key things at play here. That rules nuclear out immediately, because even if it was low carbon or zero carbon, or if it had solved its waste problem, or if it wasn't going to have a meltdown or be transported into, turned into nuclear weapons, even if all those things have been solved, it's still too slow and too expensive to be the right choice compared with renewables. So it is a real puzzle. I mean, the jobs thing you mentioned, Richard, earlier, I quickly sort of looked up because I was interested to see what the difference is. So in the UK, according to the figures I found, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there are 690,000 people employed in the renewable energy industry and about 100,000 people in the nuclear industry. So you've already got, 5 times more people and growing in the renewable energy industry. In the US, we've got 3.56 million people employed in the renewable energy industry and 68,000 workers directly employed in the nuclear power industry. I mean, that's, a huge difference. It's obvious where the growth is. And what I say to people who say, oh, it's about jobs, I say, well, do you need a job tomorrow or 20 years from now, right? Because if you need it tomorrow, this nuclear promise of some reactor that may or may not appear is going to appear, if it does at all, probably from idea to actually fissioning 20 years from now, by which time you might have retired. I mean, or aged out of the job, or at least hopefully found something else to do. So it's just this sort of delusionary idea that this is an answer to anything. Why the governors and everybody, I mean, you have to just follow the money. We talk a lot about the money trail. And in fact, if you do get Capitol Hill Citizen, which we mentioned at the beginning, Ralph Nader's print-only newspaper, so you do have to order it and it can come in the mail. The front page story by Peter Castagno is a brilliant expose of all the connections between the tech bros, the nuclear companies, and the political leaders, and the flow of money and influence, and who spoke at which club and which meeting. And I rather facetiously say it's sort of like the Epstein network. They're all in this together. It's this private little club. It's the same people a lot of the time who have all this money and all this influence, and they've decided they're going to take over. This sounds like a conspiracy theory, I know, but they've decided they're going to take over and run stuff, and it doesn't matter what the rest of us think. And so you see that in the nuclear sector as well. It's not a revolving door. It's like a multi-lane highway of back and forth of these same people lining each other's pockets. They're on each other's boards. They're connected to former and current presidents, unfortunately. I mean, it goes back to Obama and probably before that, Clinton. They've got tentacles everywhere. And so trying to extract them from these money pots, because they'll all make money. It's just everybody else that'll be left waiting. There's another really good film out. It's about cryptocurrency called Everyone is Lying to You for Money. And it's made by Ben McKenzie, and it's about the scam of cryptocurrency. And and you see what he shows you is how the Trump family makes money, whether they're buying or selling cryptocurrency. They make profit regardless. Everybody else loses. And he made this film for people who thought, I think cryptocurrency sounds kind of scammy, but I'm not sure what it is. And I thought, well, that's exactly the film we need to make about nuclear too. I mean, you made it really, Mary Beth. Nuclear sounds kind of scammy, but I'm not sure if it is. Well, it is. It is a scam. It is a scam. And you can be led down the same garden path where you think you're going to get all these jobs, and you think you're going to get this boon to the local economy, and you think you're going to solve climate change. And none of it's true. All it's going to do is lift the money out of your wallet. That's it.
And poison forever.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Linda, while you're on that subject, there was a question about breeder reactors and the myth that they can consume waste and produce more energy than they, et cetera, et cetera. What do you say about that?
Well, it's not true. I mean, I think if you want to get really into breeder reactors, you want to read the work of people like M.V. Ramana, who really can. What I love about Ramana's work is that he's a physicist, but he's also somebody who can communicate this issue on a very down-home, easy, accessible level. So if you want to understand anything about that, the science of breeder reactors and what actually, it gets a bit complicated in terms of but no, reactors do not eat their own waste. That has not been solved. Breeder reactors breed, I mean, by their very name, plutonium. Plutonium is the trigger for a nuclear weapon. I mean, the other one that comes up, which I love, is fusion. Fusion, which is perpetually 30 years away, right? But seems, we're constantly getting these headlines of these incredible breakthroughs. I'll just read you one. There's a really funny bit, I thought, with Schumer. Is not everybody's favorite person right now. This is Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader. But when they had this big breakthrough, they heralded at the National Ignition Facility, right, where they said, "Oh, we've generated more energy than it we put in," and the moment was heralded as a breakthrough, a landmark achievement. What had been forever decades away, the delivery of electricity powered by fusion was now still decades away. The NIF experiment delivered 3.15 megajoules of energy output to the 2.5 megajoules it put in for a few billionths of a second. But it took 192 lasers consuming 400 megajoules of energy to do it. Arguably, it was not a net gain at all. The NIF lab itself cost $3.5 billion to build and commission. That seems like a lot to pay for a few billionths of a second's worth of energy output. And yet, the NIF achievement was followed by an outpouring of hyperbole, hailing it as some sort of milestone for climate change. This is a quote. "This astonishing scientific advance puts us on the precipice of a future no longer reliant on fossil fuels, but instead powered by new, clean fusion energy," said U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, a New York Democrat. I'm not sure what Senator Schumer can see from the edge of his precipice, but it's not a functioning fusion reactor unless he's staring at the sun. That's pretty much the fusion story, And the other thing about fusion is, I mean, I get how exciting it is in a lab to think about cracking fusion, but it has absolutely no practical applicability. It's too late already. Even if we did crack fusion, it still comes with a lot of the same issues as fission reactors. It's a huge, it's another big thermoelectric generator. We're done with that. That's something of the past. It's no longer applicable to the smart coming grids that we have coming, and it's also not applicable to the places that will need energy the most, which is third world countries, developing countries. It's going to be wildly expensive. It already is billions. So, that's really the myth of fusion. I'm being asked about this Capitol Hill Citizen article, and so I'll reiterate that at the moment, this is the Peter Castano lead story about all the corrupt connections. It's a print-only newspaper, so you need to order it from Capitol Hill Citizen. I do think, though, that they have buckled to a little bit of the pressure. We were talking about this earlier, that really it's lovely to have print only, but we're not in that world anymore. So I think it might actually, there might be a link to it, but I haven't seen it yet. So Bart and others who've been asking about that, I will, once I know what it is, I will circulate it.
Great, thank you. Richard, do you have another question or comment?
I don't have any other questions. No, I'm just looking on the chat.
Okay.
It's a great
Well,
comment.
I was also pleased to have the question, what organizations do you think are doing effective work that could be joined and provide a way for people to get involved?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many. There's a lot of folks on here that represent great organizations around the country. I think it really depends where you live and what your interest is, and whether you want to fight a local campaign or a national campaign. I mean, one of the struggles, I think, in recent years is that a lot of the big national groups, the so-called big green groups, have sort of moved on by and large to other things. And actually, when we're having a briefing on the Hill next week for hopefully legislative aids, but we'll film this, so definitely for all of you, with some of our experts. And originally we were tasked to do this by Ralph Nader, who's the publisher of Capitol Hill Citizen, and as you know, the founder of Critical Mass, a long-time campaigner on this issue. And what he wanted to do was sort of get everybody together. Like, why don't you, all the big anti-nuclear groups, get together in Washington and have another conference to kind of reboost yourselves? And so he said this to me and to Tim Judson, who's the executive director of Nuclear Information and Resource Service. And we said to him, Ralph, you're looking at the national groups that work on nuclear. We're kind of it. There are lots of great groups across the country, NEIS in Chicago. I mean, I don't want to start naming names because then I'll just be guilty of leaving people out, and there's just too many of them. There's so many good groups. But as far as sort of when we used to have NRDC kind of and Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, I mean, they've all dropped their anti-nuclear power campaign by and large. And so we don't have that power anymore that we had, albeit it was a struggle then. I mean, a lot of the times we were blocked anyway. So, but that said, I'm not sure that matters so much, because I do think that where the power is in the local communities. And one of the places that we can one of the things I think we can take advantage of now, sadly, is this proliferation of data centers, because the data center obsession has really mobilized people. They hate billionaire tech bros, who are the ones that want them, and they hate data centers because they know what it does to the environment, to the water supply, the electricity supply, the noise pollution, all the negative things that we all know about data centers, aside from the ominous backstory of what they're really for versus what they say they're for. So, and of course, what they're saying now, these Meta and Google and Microsoft, they want to use nuclear power plants to power these data centers. So we have a huge opportunity with this already in place groundswell of opposition to data centers to introduce the negatives of nuclear power, because they're going to get a twofer, right? of evil. And so I think there's an organizing opportunity there around in communities where data centers and nuclear power plants are both threatened. Because as we said at the beginning of this program, people don't know a lot about nuclear power. They can't visualize it. School kids just believe whatever they're told because they don't see it every day and you don't taste it. There's no smoke billowing out. There's nothing tangible. And lastly, I'll say, I think it's also because of the word we use. So when we talk about energy supply, we always talk about the fuel, coal, oil, gas, solar, wind. We don't talk about uranium. We talk about this nebulous word nuclear, which has other meanings. You can have a nuclear family. There's nuclear medicine, which is a good thing, for some people. So then nuclear is sort of a neutralizing word. You can't picture nuclear. What is it? If I say that word, what comes into your head? So you can picture coal, lump of coal, gas, the smell. So I think that's part of it, is how we frame it as well, that we have to figure out new ways of communicating what this actually is so people understand that it's something you should be not only wary of, but frightened of and reject it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I would like to also point out that there's a coalition forming to push back on the executive orders that have mandated the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States, to weaken its already practically non-existent safety standards. And so a coalition is forming, and we would love people to help us respond to that. So if you are willing to let us use your email to send you information about that, we could do that. So that's one thing. And I saw another question about a play for people to present to high schools, for high school students. And I know college students have put on Libby's play, Libby Halevi, and we could also send that information. We could put her information out to the list if you'd like to give us your email permission. So those are two other comments based on the chat. Are there any other questions that you've spotted, Richard?
No, lots of great comments.
I mean, we should probably do a Lego a Lego movie because that's what's catching everybody's attention right now. So
Oh,
we need to do our own Lego movie, I think. Although maybe now it's so popular, everyone's doing them. So you've got to think of something else new to catch people's eyes. But I do think, the humor thing, I do think is important as well, because it what I love about theatre actually often is when you go to see a play that is about something ostensibly very serious or even tragic, but they still manage to weave humor in. I think that's a very remarkable talent of playwrights who can do that. But I also think it works, in terms of making it real. And so if we can try to do that, I mean, I do use it a bit to disarm people because one of the things that is in the book as well, and it happens to me at least, and it just happened recently. Somebody, I think one of you actually posted one of the videos and some guy went on and said, well, what does she know? She's got a degree in English literature. She's not qualified to talk about nuclear power. And I thought, yeah, a degree in English, it's about science. She doesn't, it was this of the little woman doesn't understand science thing. But it was also because they were looking at my so-called qualification. I thought, I said, well, congratulations, you're in the book. You're on page 157, actually, because this same argument is in the book that somehow, I got a degree in English and Italian literature 100 years ago. And so somehow his theory, it's very scientific, is that your brain then ceases to function. You can't learn anything else after that because that's your qualification on which you are entitled to expound for the rest of your life, and you are not capable of learning anything else whatsoever from that time until now. It's absurd. But we get that all the time, this effort to sort of discredit our credibility and our qualification to understand something. And, I think in your film, Mary Beth, one of the things that emerges, with people like Donna Gilmore and others who you feature, is the capacity for people to learn something completely outside their zone of understanding and become really well versed in it, and then be cited, as a sort of an expert on this particular subject, having come from a totally different background, and that we humans are much cleverer than that. And so for the British audience, this bit is sort of in the chapters how I managed to get Gary Lineker into my book. And for those of you in the UK know Gary Lineker is one of the great football heroes of our country. And when I say football, I mean English football, right? And he's in the book, and you can look up and see why he's in it. But it's the same reason, that he spoke out on something that wasn't football, and he got fired from Match of the Day, the most watched program on English television, and reinstated rather quickly after that. But there was this notion that you mustn't say anything that's not part of your specified subject area, no matter how long ago that was. So yeah. we have to confront that as well. And so I confront it with humor, because I can't think of any other way to combat that, which is because I just think it's funny that they think they're so scientific, and then they come up with this cockamamie idea that human brain is incapable of learning.
I know that's so. I think you've hit all the popular sports figure, humor. You've got it all.
Correct.
I think this is Lisa. I just wanted to interject. That's exactly what Morgan and Mary Beth and myself and others with Eon and others across are just so excited about, is to lift up popular culture and connect with popular culture and engage with people from that level. It's the stories that motivate us. And so thank you, Linda, so much for jumping
Linda,
on that.
Yeah. Mike Carberry here.
Hey, Mike.
I love you, and I love Paul. I worked for the Union of Concerned Scientists for a couple of years, and I got constantly blasted because I wasn't a scientist. But what I always said was that I have a degree in marketing and communications. And I was hired by the Union of Concerned Scientists because the scientists are not good at speaking. They're doing the science, and I'm talking about the science because that's what I'm good at. And so we can talk about these things without having an advanced degree in them. You don't have to do that. And so we have to be able to tell stories. And thank you for telling this story. I look forward to reading the book. I just got it on Saturday, but I've known you for decades, and I look forward to reading it. Thank you for being in the fight. Thanks everybody here for being in the fight. We're up against it, but it's the people power that are going to win this, because the people are we're getting hosed. It's the taxpayers and the ratepayers that are being hosed by our elected officials, and the billionaires that are putting money in their pocket by killing the planet and the people on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Great comments there. Thank you.
Absolutely. And, we also can point out that we have, and I think I do in the book, that we have a nice coterie of scientists and economists and engineers and people who are with us and who do supply that piece for us. So we don't all have to be experts on everything. As Mike said, sometimes they need translators, and so we can be the translators of what they're saying into words that people can understand. I mean, one of the things we did this actually at Beyond Nuclear, my organization, which I also encourage you to subscribe to, and then you'll get a weekly bulletin of news from us. But one of the things we have is something called talking points, and they are, each one is boiled down from much longer work that people like Ed Lyman and Amory Lovins and Rahman and others have done, so that you don't have to read the long report. We'll read it, and then we will cull it down into sound bites, message points, key things, key pullouts from their work. And then and this was all done obviously in collaboration with them. And then when you can print those talking points, they're mostly 2 sides of a single page. The small modular reactor one got a bit longer because it is kind of complicated, but but you can just use those sentences, drop them into letters to the editor, drop them into op-eds, use them for video scripts, whatever you need them. You can plagiarize your way through all of those. It's all there for you to use deliberately. So you don't have to sit there and go, oh, blank page, how am I gonna write this? Just steal those message points, put them together, send them in. And we don't do, I think, enough of that. I mean, I do feel like some of us are good at writing and some of us find it a struggle. And so for those who find it more of a struggle, use these talking points to build your letters and to build your op-eds.
Right. Beyond Nuclear has a wealth of information on your really well-organized website. My hat's off to you, but I love your website. And all your the multiple pamphlets and culling that you have done and put it into digestible form that we can all use. Thank you so much for your lifetime of work here, Linda. It's really remarkable. And I'm happy.
More of a half-life, to coin a
Okay,
phrase.
half-life.
Only half a lifetime. I haven't done it my whole life.
Yeah.
And I just want to acknowledge all the great comments in the chat, and that we will send that chat out to the people who've been who signed up for the. Oh, and Michelle, you have your hand up. Would you like to say something?
Hello, Linda and everybody. A wonderful presentation. I just wanted to add one more take on the experts issue, because just by coincidence, I'm doing a presentation in a couple of days, and my PowerPoints, which I will go through rapidly before talking, go through the question, who is an expert on nuclear power? And then I have about a dozen different disciplines with the little mini things of all the sub-disciplines. This is an extremely interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary area that, for instance, involves geopolitics. Anybody know of a war going on right now? Because back in 1970s, America wanted the Shah to develop nuclear. I can think of one. So that's just an example. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Linda, for making that tremendous presentation and answering the questions. And thank you, everybody, for the wonderful comments that you've made. As Mary Beth said, we will capture those and circulate them and give you the opportunity as well to get the link to the footage that we have. And this is one of a series of webinars and online events that we're actually trying to hold as the Transatlantic Nuclear Free Alliance. In fact, the next one we're planning is in July, actually, on the anniversary of the Trinity test, to demonstrate the direct links between civil and nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And what we try to do is we try to have speakers from a number of different countries that are engaged with our work. So we literally get a transatlantic perspective, and that's tremendous. I think it's really interesting and engaging, and it also means that we're drawn together more in partnership over the issues of common concern that we share about nuclear. So thank you, Linda. And I just wondered, did you want to just say how people can get the book? I know we put it in the chat, but you would just got to give you this final opportunity to plug it.
Yes, certainly. And I do think if you're going to do something on July 16th, apropos what Morgan said, that's the anniversary of the Church Rock nuclear disaster. So I think it would be wonderful, since that's the uranium mine, the start of everything. When you're connecting nuclear power and nuclear weapons, without uranium mining, nothing happens, right? And if you can get somebody from that community, there's plenty of great speakers from that Native community to tell their own story. I always feel that's incredibly important. I can tell it. I have the luxury of being able to tell that story in the book, but it needs to come from the people to whom it's happened. So I'd encourage you, and I can certainly help connect you if you need connections, to get a voice from that community. As far as getting the book, I think the link's been in the chat a few times. It is published by Pluto Press. which is a British publisher but has a US distributor as well. Some people have had a little difficulty with the currency issue. So I'll just walk you quickly through that if you don't mind. So at the top of the page, when you open it, it'll say UK pounds, a little black strip. Depending on the browser you use, you'll see a down arrow or not. Either way, click it if you're not in the UK. Then you'll see a pull down menu. You can choose US dollars. When you choose US dollars, a form will open. Just make sure that you've put United States in your country. Then the postage should be $7, not 18, which is what happens if you think you're buying it from the US and you're actually buying it from the UK. So a few people have told me they've had trouble with that. So there's that. I can give you a discount code, especially for all the folks who turned up today. So if you haven't bought the book yet and you want to buy it from Pluto Press, if you put all caps nuclear 30, so nuclear 30 into the discount window, you'll get 30% off the book. So that's what you can do if you want to order it from Pluto Press. If you have trouble with Pluto Press, I say this in a very soft voice so no one can hear me, but it's also on Amazon, which we try not to use, but unfortunately I've learned is evil necessity for authors. You have to have an Amazon author page. It is there if you're more fluent with Amazon, and give yourself dispensation because you're all doing so many other great things. If you buy something from Amazon once in a while, try to forgive yourself, okay? But it is a bit easier. So there's that option too. You can get it there in the UK and in the US, and in Europe there's an option, I think, for either one. So those are all the ways to get the book.
Okay,
and thank you for the opportunity
thank you for coming and joining us today, and thank you everybody else for coming to join us and for your tremendous contributions, and look forward to seeing you on the next one, and keep campaigning. Have a good day.